Colleagues, it's time to call a spade a spade. A humanitarian catastrophe of biblical proportions is unfolding in the occupied Palestinian territory, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. According to incoming information, the death toll in the enclave has exceeded 8,000 people, half of whom are children, women and the elderly. More than 2,000 people are under the rubble, half of whom are also children. More than 21,000 people were injured. The number of internally displaced persons in Gaza has reached 1.6 million. There are 640,000 Palestinians in UN camps alone. On the west bank of the Jordan River, there are more than 100 dead and 3,000 injured. These terrible numbers are growing every hour. We express our gratitude to all humanitarian workers on the ground, working at the end of their strength in conditions of catastrophic shortages of basic supplies, including medical supplies, and with extremely high risks to their lives. The scale of casualties among UN agencies is shocking. 64 staff killed, 22 injured, 42 UN facilities destroyed. We pay tribute to the UN staff who continue to work in unimaginable conditions and to those who paid for it with their lives. According to media reports, 2 peacekeepers of the UN interim force in Lebanon were wounded during Israeli shelling on the Blue Line. The largest hospital in Gaza, Al-Quds, is under threat of Israeli attack. The Israeli Air Force is launching strikes 50 meters from the facility, demanding immediate evacuation. Almost 640,000 internally displaced people have taken refuge in 150 UN sites across the Gaza Strip. As a result of the bombing, 9 hospitals were completely disabled. The remaining ones have an acute shortage of medicines. The blockade of the Gaza Strip has become, in fact, total. The enclave has no internet and mobile communications. It is simply cut off from the rest of the world. Nobody knows for sure what is happening there now. Such a blockade not only spreads even greater panic among civilians, it directly undermines the work of medical and rescue services, which means it will lead to further civilian casualties. For the same reason, it was not possible to agree on the passage of the next humanitarian convoy through the Rafah checkpoint on October 28. We categorically condemn such actions, especially in a situation where, after communications were cut off, the most powerful airstrikes since the beginning of the escalation were carried out on the enclave. In the context of active hostilities, the humanitarian response remains virtually nominal. Only 94 trucks have passed through the aforementioned Rafah checkpoint, the only point from Egypt since October 21, and, according to incoming evidence, Israel is preventing even these meager supplies. As a result, there is an acute shortage of everything in Gaza: water, fuel, food, medicine, and people are scared and driven to despair. On October 28, by decision of the military political leadership of Israel, the armed forces of this country, ignoring the position clearly expressed by the international community in the UN General Assembly resolution adopted the day before, began a ground military operation in the Gaza Strip. After intense airstrikes, the Israeli army began to enter the enclave from several directions. In the south, in the area of the Al-Buraj refugee camp and the city of Khan Younis, and in the north in the Beit Hanan area. Colleagues, the Israeli authorities called their actions differently, expanding operations or preparing a bridgehead, but that is not the point. The point is that, despite the unequivocal reaction in the world, West Jerusalem began the practical implementation of its plans to clear out the enclave. In response, we heard the assessment of the head of the Israeli Foreign Ministry that, I quote, "Israel categorically rejects the UN call for a ceasefire." End of quote. The comments of the permanent representative of Israel that the UN has lost its legitimacy did not go unnoticed. What is shocking are the statements of a number of representatives in the Knesset, widely circulated in the media, that, I quote, "there is supposedly no symmetry in the Israeli response," and that the children in Gaza brought this on themselves. End of quote. Unfortunately, it clearly follows from them that Israel is demonstratively ignoring the opinion of the vast majority of UN members, including the opinions of many Western states, on the need to stop violence. This unsightly situation was also led to by the fact that, due to the US position, the Security Council was virtually paralyzed. And it has still not been able to adopt a resolution with an urgent demand for a ceasefire. We have twice come up with similar initiatives, but Washington and West Jerusalem have completely different plans: to exterminate the population of Gaza or push it out of the Strip, and to assimilate the rest of the Palestinian population into Israel in order to thus solve the Palestinian problem. In the context of the unprecedented escalation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we must note the current increase in tension on the Syrian-Israeli border, which is associated with active external interference in combination with the illegal U.S. military presence in the north and northeast of Syria. Thus, on October 26, U.S. forces, on the orders of President Joe Biden, attacked 2 targets in the Abu Kamel region in eastern Syria. Washington said that this attack was carried out as part of the exercise of the so-called right of self-defense, in the American manner, of course, and this happens thousands of kilometers from the territory of the United States itself. Such illegitimate and unjustified actions by Washington are nothing more than a gross violation of Syrian sovereignty and international law. In today's conditions, such illegitimate military actions are fraught with extremely dangerous consequences, since they can provoke an armed escalation throughout the entire region. Colleagues, the time for half measures and half-hearted, streamlined appeals is over. No amount of humanitarian pauses will help. Humanitarian assistance cannot be provided in the midst of military action on the ground. I hope everyone here understands this. The number of victims among humanitarian workers already numbers in the dozens. Ambulances have been bombed, and those that remain cannot operate due to lack of fuel. All good humanitarian passages are, of course, important, but by themselves they will not stop the war. The priority task of the international community today is to stop the bloodshed, minimize damage to the civilian population, and transfer the situation into a political and diplomatic channel. It is necessary to consolidate collective steps aimed at restarting a full-fledged negotiation process between Israelis and Palestinians in order to implement the 2-state formula approved by the UN. On its basis, an independent Palestinian state should be created within the 1967 borders with its capital in East Jerusalem, coexisting in peace and security with Israel. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask the representative of the United States a question. Explain why you are against a ceasefire? Does this mean that the United States, as a permanent member of the Security Council, supports the doctrine of total retaliation in Gaza? Where is your sympathy for civilians, which you so eloquently express at every meeting of the Council on Ukraine? I want to address the same questions to the rest of the Western delegations in the Security Council, who bashfully abstained on all the draft resolutions we introduced that called for a ceasefire. Colleagues, your double standards are more than obvious. The population of your own countries, where mass demonstrations in support of the Palestinians are taking place, is already demanding an answer for them. In the current situation, the Russian Federation is making intensive efforts to de-escalate the situation on the ground, aimed at quickly resolving the crisis. We conveyed a clear message to all parties involved. There is an immediate need to cease fire and provide humanitarian corridors in order to urgently provide assistance to all those in need. President Putin made it very clear: we categorically do not accept and condemn any terrorist acts. We express our condolences to everyone who has lost their loved ones in Israel, Palestine and other countries. But while condemning terrorism and hostage-taking and demanding their unconditional release, we categorically disagree that the terrorist threat can be responded to by violating international humanitarian law, including the indiscriminate use of force against civilian infrastructure where civilians are known to be present, along with solving the urgent tasks of ending the current spiral of violence. It is necessary to urgently begin to agree on a strategy of collective action for a political settlement of the conflict. In the past, the task of promoting it was carried out by a quartet of international mediators. However, the United States has done everything to undermine this effective instrument. On the agenda is the formation of a collective mediation mechanism with an active role for regional states. This is supported by the positive trends that had emerged in the development of the Middle East situation before the latest aggravation around Gaza, Saudi-Iranian normalization, the reintegration of Syria into the League of Arab States, the gradual improvement of interstate relations between Syria and Turkey. All this proves that when countries in the region take matters into their own hands and are not subject to pressure from extra-regional players, they achieve a lot towards stabilizing the Middle East. Given the growing escalation in the Palestinian enclave and the unimaginable consequences for civilians cut off from external supplies, we believe it is important to hold regular open briefings like today's. The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, without any discrimination, must remain the focus of our close attention, as it does in the context of other crises. Mr. Chairman, some colleagues trying to shift the focus from the dramatic events surrounding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict raised the issue of the October 29 incident at Makhachkala Airport, Republic of Dagestan, Russia. Exhaustive comments about this have already been given by the Russian leadership, representatives of regional authorities, and the Muslim clergy. A legal assessment of the actions of the protesters will be given by the Investigative Committee of Russia, which opened a criminal case into the riots. Dozens of riot participants have already been detained and interrogated, and investigations are underway. It is obvious that any illegal actions are unacceptable. However, an attempt to portray an unauthorized action at the airport as an outburst of some anti-Semitic sentiments in Russian society, in particular in the North Caucasus, is unacceptable. This region has long served as an example of peaceful and friendly coexistence of representatives of numerous nationalities. Russian society, unlike, by the way, Western society, is in principle alien to manifestations of hostility and intolerance on religious, ethnic and racial grounds. Since ancient times, representatives of all major faiths have coexisted peacefully in our country. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, as data from Russian security forces confirm, the events that took place yesterday in Makhachkala clearly show traces of external interference, including massive external information influence through social networks, and the traces of this, don't be surprised, lead to Ukraine. Russia's ill-wishers really want to abuse the situation to play on the feelings of Russian Muslims against the backdrop of shocking footage from the Gaza Strip, showing the horror of what is happening there. The death of women, children, old people, and medical personnel. We recommend that some of our colleagues do not try to shift responsibility from a sore head to a healthy one, but to pay attention to the situation in their capitals, where numerous Muslim protests are raging, which are brutally suppressed by the police, despite the declared commitment of the authorities of Western countries to multiculturalism and freedom of expression. Thank you.